The operating theater at Dubai's Al Rashid Medical Center gleamed under surgical lights that turned blood into something almost beautiful, rubies scattered across sterile green drapes. Dr. Khalid Al-Mansouri's hands moved with the precision that came from 15 years of cardiovascular surgery, suturing vessels so delicate that a tremor of even 1 millimeter could mean the difference between life and death. His team worked in synchronized silence, each member anticipating his needs before he voiced them. In the observation gallery above, medical students watched through reinforced glass, witnessing what their instructors called the ballet of excellence. But excellence has a shadow side. Behind the surgical mask that hid Khalid's handsome features, behind the reputation that made him Dubai's most sought-after cardiac surgeon, lived secrets that would soon transform this temple of healing into a crime scene. At the instrument tray stood nurse Maricel Santos, 29 years old, with hands that had once passed him scalpels with perfect timing but now trembled with knowledge that would destroy them both. She knew what he'd done to her. She knew what was growing in her bloodstream, replicating with viral efficiency, marking her for a slow death. And she knew exactly how to make him pay. Today was March 8, 2019. In exactly 6 hours, she would ensure that the surgeon who had infected her with HIV would carry the same death sentence. The syringe in her pocket felt heavier than its actual weight, loaded with her own infected blood and a justice the courts would never provide. Revenge, she'd learned, sometimes required becoming the monster you were fighting. Maricel Grace Santos was born on July 12, 1989, in Tarlac City, central Luzon, a region known for sugarcane fields that stretched like green oceans under merciless sun and for producing some of the Philippines' most determined nurses. Her father, Eduardo Santos, drove a jeepney along routes that connected rural barangays to the city center, his earnings dependent on passenger volume and fuel prices that fluctuated like gambling odds. Her mother, Grace, the namesake Maricel carried as her middle name, worked as a public school teacher, her government salary providing stability but never abundance in a household with 6 children competing for resources. Maricel was the third child, positioned perfectly to be overlooked, not the responsible eldest son, not the treasured youngest daughter, but one of the middle children whose individual dreams were often sacrificed for collective family survival. Her childhood home in Barangay San Vicente was concrete block construction with a corrugated metal roof that turned their interior into an oven during summer months and leaked during the monsoon season. They shared 2 bedrooms among 8 people, privacy being a luxury as unattainable as air conditioning or consistent internet access. School for Maricel meant 4-kilometer walks each direction, uniforms washed by hand every night and dried on the clothesline where tropical humidity meant they were never completely dry, and studying by the light of a single bulb that serviced the entire main room. But she excelled anyway, her grades consistently placing her in the top 10% despite lacking the tutoring and resources available to wealthier classmates. Her mother recognized Maricel's potential early, encouraging her toward nursing, a profession that promised overseas employment opportunities and the kind of salaries that could transform entire families' economic trajectories. At Tarlac State University, Maricel pursued her Bachelor of Science in Nursing with the single-minded determination of someone who understood that education was the only escape route from generational poverty. She worked part-time at a local clinic, studying between shifts, sleeping 4 to 5 hours nightly, existing on rice and instant noodles supplemented with whatever vegetables were cheapest at the market. Her SOC life was non-existent. While classmates attended parties and dated, Maricel was either working, studying, or sleeping. Romance was a luxury for people who had the emotional bandwidth and financial security to indulge in it. Her clinical rotations revealed a natural aptitude for emergency and surgical nursing. While other students grew queasy at the sight of traumatic injuries or panicked during medical crises, Maricel remained calm, her hands steady, her thinking clear under pressure. Supervising physicians noted her exceptional composure and her ability to anticipate needs, the mark of an excellent surgical nurse who could read situations before they fully developed. She passed her nursing board examination in 2010 at age 21, scoring in the top 15% nationally. But in the Philippines, even registered nurses struggled to find employment that paid living wages. Hospitals offered positions at 8,000 to 12,000 pesos monthly, roughly $160 to $240, salaries that barely covered basic expenses and provided nothing to send home to families who had invested everything in their education. Like hundreds of thousands of Filipino nurses before her, Maricel looked abroad for opportunities to actually use her credentials while earning enough to justify the sacrifice of leaving everything familiar behind. The Middle East beckoned with promises of tax-free salaries, modern facilities, and professional development opportunities unavailable in the Philippines' underfunded medical system. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE actively recruited Filipino nurses, their healthcare systems dependent on imported medical talent willing to work long hours for salaries that seemed enormous compared to Philippine wages but were actually modest by Gulf standards. Maricel's application to Al Rashid Medical Center in Dubai was accepted in early 2012. The recruitment process consumed 4 months and cost her family 180,000 pesos borrowed from relatives and a lending cooperative, money that represented over a year of her parents' combined income. Medical examinations, police clearances, document authentication, visa processing, recruitment agency fees, and airfare created a debt burden that would take Maricel years to repay even with her Dubai salary. She arrived in Dubai on June 3, 2012, at age 22, carrying a single suitcase containing her uniforms, a few personal items, her nursing credentials, and a small statue of the Santo Niño that her mother had pressed into her hands at Manila Airport with whispered prayers for her safety. The flight from Manila to Dubai took 9 hours, but the cultural and economic distance was immeasurable. She was traveling from a developing nation where nurses were undervalued and underpaid to a wealthy emirate where medical professionals were imported like luxury goods, necessary for the system but never truly belonging to it. Al Rashid Medical Center represented the pinnacle of Gulf healthcare, a 450-bed private hospital in Dubai healthcare city that catered to the Emirates' wealthy citizens, expatriate executives, and medical tourists seeking world-class treatment in a region that had transformed from desert outpost to global medical hub within a single generation. The facility featured technology as advanced as any American or European hospital, departments staffed by internationally recruited specialists, and price points that made treatment accessible only to the insured wealthy or desperately ill with resources to spend. Maricel's initial assignment was to the general surgical ward, working 12-hour shifts across rotating schedules that disrupted any possibility of establishing normal sleep patterns. Her salary of 7,500 dirhams monthly seemed like a fortune compared to Philippine wages, roughly $2,000, more than 10 times what she could have earned at home. But Dubai's cost of living quickly consumed that apparent wealth. Her shared accommodation with 5 other Filipino nurses in a cramped apartment in Interna Tainal City cost 1,500 dirhams monthly. Food, transportation, phone service, and basic necessities consumed another 2,000 dirhams. She sent 3,000 dirhams home to her family monthly, money that went toward her siblings' education, her parents' medical needs, and slowly repaying the debts incurred to get her to Dubai. That left perhaps 1,000 dirhams for personal expenses, emergency savings, and the occasional small luxury that made her exile bearable. Her first 2 years in Dubai were characterized by exhausting work, profound isolation, and the slow realization that the glittering city visible from her hospital windows existed in a dimension separate from the one she actually inhabited. Dubai for wealthy Emiratis and Western expatriates meant luxury hotels, designer shopping, beach clubs, and entertainment options limited only by imagination and budget. Dubai for Filipino nurses meant long shifts, shared accommodations, occasional visits to budget restaurants in Dera, and Skype calls home that highlighted how much she was missing: siblings' graduations, parents' birthdays, family celebrations where her presence was represented only by the money she sent. But Maricel adapted with the resilience that had carried her through nursing school. She made friends among the Filipino nursing community, joined a Catholic prayer group that met weekly in apartment common rooms, and threw herself into professional development. She pursued specialized certifications in perioperative nursing, attended training sessions during her off hours, and volunteered for the most challenging assignments. By 2014, her competence had earned her a transfer to the cardiovascular surgical unit, the hospital's most prestigious department and the domain of Dr. Khalid Al-Mansouri. Dr. Khalid Muhammad Al-Mansouri represented Dubai's aspirational narrative made flesh, the local Emirati who had achieved international excellence through education and dedication rather than merely inheriting wealth from oil venues. Born in 1975 to a prominent Dubai family with roots predating the oil boom, Khalid had grown up in the unique position of being both privileged and pressured. His father, Muhammad Al-Mansouri, was a successful businessman with construction and real estate holdings. His mother, Fatima, came from a respected family with religious and scholarly traditions. They expected their eldest son to bring honor to the family name through achievement, not merely to coast on inherited advantages. Khalid had attended the best private schools in Dubai before being sent to England for university, first to Imperial College London for undergraduate studies in biological sciences, then to Cambridge University for medical school. His surgical residency was completed at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, followed by a cardiovascular surgery fellowship at the Cleveland Clinic. By the time he returned to Dubai in 2008 at age 33, he carried credentials that would have been impressive for anyone and were particularly notable for an Emirati in a field where Gulf nationals were vastly outnumbered by imported expertise. His return coincided with Dubai's aggressive expansion of its healthcare sector. Al Rashid Medical Center recruited him as their lead cardiovascular surgeon, offering a salary package, benefits, and title that reflected both his qualifications and his value as an Emirati success story. Within 3 years, he had built the department into regional prominence, attracting patients from across the Gulf, performing complex procedures with success rates that rivaled Western medical centers, and mentoring younger surgeons who came to learn from someone who had mastered his craft. But professional excellence coexisted with personal emptiness. Khalid's marriage to Layla, arranged when he was 28 and she was 21, had been a union of prominent families more than a romance. Layla came from old Dubai merchant aristocracy, her family's wealth predating oil revenues. She was beautiful, educated, and appropriate, everything a successful Emirati surgeon should want in a wife. Their marriage produced 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, who attended elite private schools and wanted for nothing material. Yet Khalid felt increasingly disconnected from his own life. Layla's interests centered on social activities within Emirati women's circles, charity work that provided status rather than serving genuine need, and managing their household staff with the efficiency of a corporate executive. Their conversations were transactional, coordinating schedules, discussing children's needs, planning social obligations. Intimacy, both emotional and physical, had become ritualistic and infrequent, performed out of duty rather than desire. At 39, Khalid was internationally respected, financially secure, and profoundly lonely. He spent increasing hours at the hospital, finding more purpose in surgical challenges than in his actual home. His reputation for dedication was really avoidance dressed as professional commitment. He told himself this was normal, that successful people often sacrificed personal happiness for professional achievement. He didn't recognize he was a man starving emotionally while surrounded by abundance. The affair began not with dramatic romance but with gradual recognition of connection during high-stress situations. Maricel Santos joined Khalid's surgical team in January 2014, her skills immediately apparent. During a complex coronary artery bypass procedure on an emergency patient, she anticipated his needs with uncanny accuracy. Instruments appeared in his hand before he requested them. Her monitoring of the patient's vitals provided information before he needed to ask, and her calm demeanor during complications helped stabilize the entire team's performance. "Excellent work today, Nurse Santos," he told her after that first surgery, his English carrying the slight British accent acquired during his London years. "How long have you been in cardiovascular?" "This is my first month in your department, Dr. Al-Mansouri," Maricel replied, surprised he was speaking to her directly. Most surgeons barely acknowledge nursing staff beyond barking orders during procedures. "But I've been studying cardiovascular nursing protocols since I knew I'd be assigned here." Something in her dedication resonated with Khalid's own approach to his craft. Over the following weeks, he found himself requesting Maricel for his surgical team whenever possible. Their professional rapport deepened. She learned his preferences, rhythms, and unspoken communication patterns. He came to trust her judgment, occasionally asking her opinion on patient presentations or procedural approaches, treating her as a junior colleague rather than merely support staff. The transformation from professional respect to personal interest was gradual and, from Khalid's perspective, surprising. He began noticing details beyond her clinical competence, the way she smiled at patients to calm their pre-surgical anxiety, the careful attention she paid to elderly patients who reminded her of her grandparents back in Tarlac, the quiet dignity with which she handled demanding physicians and difficult situations. He found himself manufacturing reasons to seek her out for consultations about patients, conversations that gradually included more personal elements, questions about her family, her adjustment to Dubai, her thoughts on living so far from home. Maricel, for her part, was initially simply grateful for recognition from a surgeon whose approval could advance her career. But Khalid's genuine interest in her as a person rather than just a skilled pair of hands slowly penetrated the emotional armor she'd built during years of being treated as invisible by patients and physicians alike. He remembered details she'd mentioned in passing, asking about her sister's nursing board examination results, inquiring whether her father's health had improved, commenting on OKs she'd mentioned reading. In a city where she often felt like a utility rather than a human being, his attention felt like validation of her existence. The first boundary violation was small, Khalid offering to drive Maricel home after a particularly exhausting overnight shift in July 2014. Her usual carpool had already left, and she faced an expensive taxi ride or long wait for the next shared transport. Khalid, seeing her standing alone in the hospital parking lot at 7 a.m., pulled up in his Mercedes and offered a ride before his conscience could override the impulse. During that 30-minute drive to International City, conversation flowed with surprising ease. Khalid spoke about the pressures of maintaining excellence, of feeling perpetually observed as one of the few Emirati surgeons in a field dominated by imported expertise. Maricel shared the isolation of foreign worker life, the guilt of missing family milestones, the exhaustion of working to send money home while barely surviving herself. By the time they reached her building, both recognized they'd shared more honesty in 30 minutes than either typically expressed in months. "Thank you, Doctor," Maricel said as she gathered her belongings. "This was very kind of you." "It's Khalid," he replied, the informality surprising them both. "When we're not in New York, you can call me Khalid." That intimacy, the permission to use his first name, represented a crossing of professional boundaries both understood but neither acknowledged. The rides home became more frequent. Coffee meetings appeared on their schedules to discuss patient care coordination. Text message conversations that began about work schedules gradually included more personal elements: good morning greetings, how was your day inquiries, the small intimacies that create emotional affairs before physical ones develop. By October 2014, they had become dependent on each other's company in ways neither fully admitted. Khalid found himself thinking about Maricel during family dinners, during his children's school events, during the social obligations that filled his Emirati life. She represented something authentic in a world that felt increasingly performative. Maricel caught herself dressing more carefully on days she knew she'd be working with Khalid, feeling a flutter of anticipation when his name appeared on her phone, daydreaming about conversations they'd had or might have. The physical affair began in December 2014, during the hospital's annual staff appreciation event. Khalid had ensured Maricel's team was recognized for their excellence, engineering an opportunity to speak with her privately in a quiet corridor outside the banquet hall. Their conversation, fueled by the single glass of wine Maricel had permitted herself, turned more personal than ever before. Khalid spoke about feeling trapped in a life he'd never chosen but had accepted as his role. Maricel confessed she sometimes wondered if sacrificing everything for money to send home was worth the cost to her own chance at happiness. The kiss that followed was tentative, frightened, loaded with awareness that they were crossing a line that would change everything. When they pulled apart, both were shaking. "We can't," Maricel whispered, though her hand was still on his chest. "I know," Khalid agreed, even as he kissed her again. The affair that developed over the following months followed patterns familiar to anyone who has studied forbidden relationships. Khalid rented a small apartment in Dubai Marina, ostensibly as a closer option for overnight calls at the hospital, actually as a private space where he and Maricel could exist without their professional and social roles constraining them. They met there 2 or 3 times weekly, stealing hours between her shifts and his family obligations. For Maricel, the relationship was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. She was in love with a man who made her feel valued in ways no one ever had. WHO treated her as an intellectual and emotional equal despite their vastly different social positions. But she was also engaged in an affair that violated her Catholic upbringing, risked her employment and visa status, and had no possible future beyond the temporary present. Khalid was married to an Emirati woman, father to Emirati children, embedded in social and family structures that would never accept a Filipino nurse as a legitimate partner. Khalid told himself the affair was a temporary respite from a stifling marriage, a way to feel alive again before returning to his duties. He promised himself he would never leave Layla. Divorce in Emirati society, particularly for someone in his position, would be professionally and socially catastrophic. But he also couldn't imagine ending his relationship with Maricel, who provided emotional sustenance his marriage hadn't offered in years. They created a private world in that Marina apartment, cooking together, watching films, having the kinds of long conversations about life, meaning, and purpose that people in functioning relationships take for granted but which felt revolutionary to both of them. The sex was tender and passionate, built on genuine affection rather than mere physical attraction. Maricel found herself experiencing joy she'd forgotten was possible. Khalid rediscovered parts of himself that professional success and family duty had buried. But forbidden relationships exist under constant stress. Maricel's roommates noticed her frequent absences, her new possessions that seemed beyond her salary, her distraction during conversations. The Filipino nursing community in Dubai was small and interconnected. Rumors circulated quickly about who was seeing whom, particularly when the relationship crossed the dangerous boundaries of nationality, religion, and marital status. Warning came from multiple sources, friends expressing concern about her involvement with a married man, particularly an Emirati whose cultural and legal advantages meant she would bear all risks, colleagues noting that hospital administrators were aware of their relationship and that her position could be terminated for unprofessional conduct. The warnings intensified through 2015 and into 2016. Maricel's best friend, Lorna, pulled her aside after Mass one Sunday with brutal honesty. "Maricel, you need to end this before it destroys you. He's never leaving his wife. Even if he wanted to, his family would never allow it. You're risking everything, your job, your visa, your reputation, for a relationship that has no future. Please think about what you're doing." But love, or what Maricel believed was love, made her deaf to reason. Khalid had become her emotional center, the thing that made Dubai bearable, the relationship that validated all her sacrifices. She convinced herself that what they had was special enough to overcome obstacles, that their connection was deep enough to eventually find a way forward. The pregnancy scare in March 2016 should have been the wake-up call that ended everything. Maricel's period was 2 weeks late, and the terror that gripped both of them revealed the fundamental inequality of their relationship. For Khalid, a pregnancy would be professionally embarrassing but ultimately manageable. Men in his position had been forgiven for far worse. For Maricel, pregnancy would mean immediate termination, visa cancellation, deportation, and return to the Philippines in disgrace, with her family learning she'd thrown away everything for an affair with a married man. The pregnancy test came back negative, but the incident forced conversations they'd been avoiding. Khalid promised to be more careful, to ensure they used protection consistently. But Maricel began to recognize the asymmetry of their risk. She bore all potential consequences while he risked little beyond temporary embarrassment. The realization created a crack in her idealized vision of their relationship, a growing awareness that she was participating in her own exploitation. Through 2016 and into 2017, the affair continued but with increasing strain. Khalid's family and social obligations took precedence over their time together with growing frequency. Plans were cancelled when Layla needed him for family events. Their meetings became rushed, squeezed between his other commitments. Maricel began to feel like a mistress rather than a partner, available for his convenience but never prioritized, receiving the leftover time and energy after his real life consumed his attention. The discovery that changed everything came in October 2017, during a routine health screening required by the hospital for all staff. Maricel's blood work revealed HIV-positive status. The diagnosis was delivered in the hospital's employee health clinic by Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, the Nigerian physician who managed occupational health. Nurse Santos, I'm sorry to inform you that your HIV screening came back reactive. We've run a confirmatory test, and unfortunately, it's positive. We need to discuss treatment options and reporting protocols. Maricel sat in stunned silence as Dr. Okonkwo explained viral loads, CD4 counts, antiretroviral therapy, and the implications for her continued employment. The words washed over her like noise, her mind unable to process the reality that she had been infected with a virus that would require lifetime treatment, could affect her employability, and would eventually kill her if left untreated. How did I get this? She asked when she could finally speak. I haven't been with anyone except. I mean, I'm not promiscuous. I don't use drugs. Dr. Okonkwo's expression showed sympathy mixed with the professional distance required to discuss difficult topics. HIV transmission occurs through specific pathways, unprotected sexual contact being the most common. Have you had any sexual partners who might be high risk? The implication was clear. Maricel had been sexually active with only one person in the past 3 years, Khalid, which meant either he had infected her, or he was also infected and didn't know it. She insisted Khalid get tested immediately. His reaction to her diagnosis revealed everything about the actual nature of their relationship. Instead of concern or support, his first response was anger that she might have infected him. Instead of getting tested immediately, he demanded to know whether she'd been sleeping with anyone else. Instead of standing by her as she faced a devastating diagnosis, he disappeared for 2 weeks, avoiding her calls and messages while he apparently tried to decide whether to get tested or simply pretend the situation didn't exist. When Khalid finally did get tested, the results confirmed what Maricel already suspected. He was HIV positive with viral markers suggesting he'd been infected for at least 2 to 3 years. Which meant he had likely infected her, either knowingly or through negligent failure to get tested despite engaging in extramarital affairs where exposure was possible. The confrontation that followed was devastating. Maricel demanded to know whether Khalid had known about his status before they became intimate. He claimed ignorance, insisting he'd never been tested and never had symptoms. But his defensiveness suggested possible knowledge or at least willful ignorance. Perhaps he'd suspected something but avoided testing to maintain plausible deniability. Did you infect your wife too? Maricel asked, her voice shaking with rage and horror. How many people have you exposed to this? Khalid's response revealed the depths of his selfishness. This isn't my fault. You're a nurse. You should have insisted on protection. You're as responsible for this as I am. The victim blaming shattered whatever remained of Maricel's illusions about their relationship. She understood now that she'd been convenient rather than cherished, useful rather than loved. He had taken what he wanted from her, emotional support, gratification, ego validation, while exposing her to risks he'd never disclosed. Now, faced with consequences, his primary concern was protecting himself rather than taking responsibility for the harm he'd caused. The hospital's response to Maricel's diagnosis was swift and devastating. While UAE law technically prohibited employment discrimination based on HIV status, the reality for foreign workers was different. Her contract was not renewed when it came up for annual revision in January 2018. The explanation was vague, organizational restructuring, and budget constraints, but the timing made the actual reason obvious. She was given 3 months to settle her affairs and leave the country unless she found alternative sponsorship. Khalid, by contrast, faced no professional consequences. His status as an Emirati citizen provided protections unavailable to foreign workers. His family connections and social position insulated him from repercussions. He continued performing surgeries, receiving accolades, living his privileged life while Maricel faced deportation, medical uncertainty, and the destruction of everything she'd sacrificed 6 years to build. The injustice of this disparity consumed Maricel through early 2018. She had come to Dubai to help her family escape poverty. She had worked exhausting hours, lived modestly, sent almost everything home. She had fallen in love with a man who had seemed kind and genuine. And her reward was HIV infection, job loss, deportation, and the knowledge that her family's economic security, built on her remittances, would evaporate when she returned to the Philippines unable to work in nursing. Depression gave way to rage. Rage at Khalid for his negligence or deception. Rage at a system that protected wealthy men while disposing of foreign workers. Rage at herself for trusting someone whose privilege should have been a warning rather than an attraction. And from that rage grew something darker, the desire not just for justice but for revenge, for ensuring that Khalid pay a price proportional to the harm he'd caused rather than skating through consequences as privileged men always seem to do. The plan formed gradually through February and March 2018. Maricel's contract had not yet officially ended. She remained on staff through March 31st. She still had access to hospital facilities, still worked occasional shifts in the cardiovascular unit when they were short-staffed. And she still had access to medical supplies, including syringes and needles. The revenge she envisioned was elegant in its cruelty. She would draw her own blood she knew carried high viral loads of HIV, and find an opportunity to inject it into Khalid. Not enough to kill him immediately, but enough to ensure he carried the virus in quantities that would accelerate his own disease progression. If she was going to suffer and die from this infection he'd given her, he would experience an aggressive version of the same fate. She researched viral transmission rates, studied how much infected blood would need to be injected to ensure infection, calculated how to deliver the dose in a manner that might escape immediate detection. She prepared a syringe with 10 milliliters of her blood mixed with anticoagulant to prevent clotting. She carried it in her uniform pocket, waiting for the opportunity she knew would eventually present itself. That opportunity came on March 8, 2019. Khalid was scheduled to perform a complex valve replacement surgery, a 6-hour procedure requiring intense concentration and a full surgical team. Maricel manipulated the schedule to ensure she was assigned as one of the scrub nurses. During such lengthy surgeries, there was always a moment when the surgeon stepped away briefly, to confer with an anesthesiologist, to review imaging, to take a momentary break while an assistant handled routine portions of the procedure. 4 hours into the surgery, that moment arrived. Khalid stepped back from the table to examine any updated cardiac imaging on a monitor. The attending surgical resident continued the current suturing phase. The rest of the team was focused on their specific responsibilities, monitoring, assisting, documenting. No one was watching Maricel. She moved with practiced efficiency. From her pocket, she retrieved the prepared syringe. In one smooth motion, she punctured Khalid's lower back through his surgical gown and clothing, a location painful enough that he flinched but not immediately visible to others. She depressed the plunger, injecting the entire 10 milliliters of HIV-infected blood directly into his tissue, then withdrew the needle and disposed of it in the sharps container before anyone fully registered what had happened. Khalid jerked at the pain, his hand reaching toward his lower back. What the, did something just sting me? You might have pulled a muscle, doctor, Maricel said calmly. You've been standing in the same position for 4 hours. The surgery continued. Khalid mentioned the pain to no one else, assuming it was indeed a muscle issue from prolonged standing. The patient survived the procedure successfully. The team dispersed to their respective duties. And Maricel left the hospital for the last time, her contract having expired, her revenge complete. The investigation that eventually unfolded was complex and unprecedented. Khalid's lower back developed an infection at the injection site within days, not from HIV, which wouldn't manifest symptoms for weeks or months, but from bacteria introduced by a non-sterile needle puncture through clothing. The infection required treatment, and during that treatment, physicians discovered what appeared to be a deliberate injection wound rather than an accidental needle stick. Hospital security reviewed surgical theater footage. The cameras, positioned primarily to observe the operating table and patient rather than staff members, didn't provide perfect clarity on what had happened. But analysis of the video, combined with Khalid's account of the sudden pain and Maricel's proximity at that exact moment, created enough suspicion to warrant investigation. Maricel was arrested at Dubai International Airport on March 30, 2019, as she attempted to board her flight back to Manila. Her luggage was searched, and in a journal she'd been keeping, investigators found detailed entries documenting her plan, her motivations, and her confession. She had written it all down, perhaps as catharsis, perhaps as insurance, perhaps because she wanted the truth on record even if she was caught. The charges were attempted murder, assault causing grievous bodily harm, and violation of medical ethics. The trial that began in June 2019 became international news, raising uncomfortable questions about power dynamics, medical ethics, and justice for foreign workers in the Gulf. Maricel's defense team, provided by Filipino advocacy organizations and human rights groups, argued that her actions, while criminal, were the desperate response of a victim who had been infected through negligence or deception, then abandoned to face consequences alone while her abuser suffered nothing. They presented evidence of the systemic inequality that foreign workers faced, the psychological trauma of her diagnosis and abandonment, and the temporary insanity that could result from such extreme circumstances. The prosecution painted her as a calculated criminal who had weaponized her HIV status to harm someone who had tried to help her, conveniently ignoring the context of their affair and his role in her infection. They focused on the deliberate planning, the smuggling of biological material into a surgical theater, and the potential risk she'd posed to everyone in that operating room. The most devastating testimony came from medical experts who explained that Maricel's injection had indeed infected Khalid with HIV. Viral load testing confirmed the transmission. Moreover, because she had injected such a large quantity of high viral load blood directly into tissue, his infection was severe, with viral counts that suggested rapid disease progression. He would require aggressive antiretroviral therapy for the rest of his life. The trial also forced public disclosure of their affair, Khalid's existing HIV status before Maricel's injection, and the circumstances surrounding her original infection. His reputation was destroyed, the respected surgeon revealed as an adulterer who had infected his mistress with HIV, then abandoned her to face consequences alone. His medical license was suspended pending investigation. His marriage to Layla disintegrated publicly when she also tested positive for HIV, confirming he'd been exposing multiple partners. Maricel was convicted of assault and administering a noxious substance but acquitted of attempted murder, the court accepting that her intent was to infect rather than kill, and that the distinction mattered legally. She was sentenced to 8 years in Dubai Central Jail, followed by permanent deportation. The aftermath extended far beyond the principals. Khalid's medical career ended. His license was permanently revoked not for his HIV status but for the ethics violations involved in his relationship with subordinate staff and his failure to disclose his status to partners. His family ostracized him when Layla's HIV status became public knowledge. He became a pariah in Emirati society, living on family money but stripped of the status and respect that had defined his identity. Maricel served 5 years of her sentence before being deported to the Philippines in 2024. She returned to a country where her story had made her infamous, the nurse who had deliberately infected her lover with HIV. Her family struggled with the stigma and with Maricel's health, which had deteriorated during her imprisonment despite access to antiretroviral therapy. The legacy of this case sparked policy changes in the UAE regarding HIV disclosure obligations, mandatory testing FO. Are healthcare workers engaging in high-risk procedures, and enhanced protections for foreign workers reporting sexual harassment or assault by employers or supervisors? But systemic change moves slowly, and for every policy improvement, countless foreign workers still face exploitation with limited recourse. The questions this tragedy raises resist easy answers. Was Maricel justified in her revenge, given that legal systems failed to hold Khalid accountable for infecting her? Does psychological trauma excuse premeditated violence? How do we balance sympathy for victims with condemnation of vigilante justice? What responsibility do privileged individuals bear when they exploit vulnerable populations? And how do we protect workers in foreign countries where their legal status makes them perpetually vulnerable to abuse? If you're a healthcare worker abroad, please understand that intimate relationships with patients, superiors, or members of host country populations carry risks far beyond normal relationship complications. Power imbalances, visa dependencies, and legal systems that privilege citizens over foreign workers create situations where you bear disproportionate consequences for shared decisions. Protect yourself, both physically and legally, with awareness that no relationship is worth sacrificing your health, career, and future. If you know someone in a similar situation, help them recognize warning signs before tragedy occurs. Connect them with advocacy organizations, legal resources, and medical support systems designed to protect vulnerable workers. Isolation enables exploitation, community provides protection. Maricel Santos came to Dubai dreaming of helping her family escape poverty through honest work in a profession dedicated to healing. She fell in love with a man whose privilege blinded her to the inevitable imbalance of their relationship. When that relationship infected her with a terminal virus and society offered no justice, she chose a revenge that transformed her from victim to criminal, ensuring both their destructions. 2 lives ruined, multiple families devastated, and in the end, no winners, just casualties of a system that treats human beings as disposable resources rather than people deserving dignity, justice, and protection regardless of passport or position. May this story serve not as entertainment but as warning. May we build systems where justice doesn't require vigilantism, where victims receive protection rather than blame, and where power cannot operate without accountability. And may we remember that beneath every headline about spectacular crimes lie human stories of dreams betrayed, trust violated, and desperation driving people toward choices that destroy everyone involved.